Hello, I'm Robert, and I'm fact-checking and helping you if you're scared of many things. And this is if you're scared about the news that the Supreme Court, that there's a first draft that argues for overturning Roe versus Wade, which is the right to abortion in the United States. So the first and most important thing is that this is a first draft. It's certain to change. And back then, the justices themselves, they did not know, and most likely they still don't know what the final decision will be. It would be very serious professional misconduct for a justice to decide in advance before going through the legal case, the legal arguments. So they don't know. And so it's not at all certain that this is even going to be decided. If you look at what they actually say in this draft, then the basic argument is that it's a very long, complicated, detailed legal argument, discussion of reliance and what it means for the American people, and the basic decision at the end of it is that because there's a very strict line between what can be decided by justices and what can be decided by legislators. And justices are very, very cautious about not going beyond their territory into stuff that should be legislated. And with this particular draft, then the alito drew that line very, very much towards the justices' side of things. And it's really quite an extraordinary extreme as to how far it is drawn towards the justices. And that's basically what happened. So he said that there's a basic kind of reliance that if you want that the idea that you have to change your behavior because of if they overturn Roe versus Wade, then that particular kind of reliance, then even Roe versus Wade, even Casey, I think it is, I'm sorry, not Roe versus Wade, they agree that particular kind of reliance isn't present here because it is absolutely fine to legislate for something if it leads to people having to change their behavior. So the reliance is of a different sort. And the reliance is that for Roe versus Wade is, and for Casey, is that the general public are used to the idea that they can get married before they're ready for children, and they can get together as a couple before they're ready for children, relying on contraception. And then, of course, it depends on their philosophy and religion. Some of them will decide that they are by their religion pro-life, and then they will say, oh well, if we can't do anything about it, then we're going to have a child anyway. But others will say, well, if there's some contraception doesn't work on that very remote possibility, then we will go for an abortion. So that is the point in which there's a psychological reliance on the right for abortion. That some women, or people generally, they make important life decisions such as whether to get married or to whether to become a partner with someone based on relying on contraception, and for some of them based on relying on abortion on the remote possibility that the contraception fails. So the big question is that judicial? Is that a reliance that the justices can decide that they are relying on it, or is that something for the legislators to decide that they are relying on the right to abortion? And so Alito said that in his view, just in this draft, we don't know what his view is now, and it was even just a trial balloon. It's not necessarily even his view. His legal opinion, I mean not his personal view, his legal opinion as he put it in the draft, a written opinion that is likely to change. And his legal opinion was that in this draft was that this is a matter for legislators to decide. So that's the central argument of the draft. And then another part, there's an awful lot of news stories claiming that he's trying to root all this in ancient history, going back to, they do in fact, in the historical section, it goes all the way back to the 13th century. In that historical section, though, he's talking about something completely different. It's about whether, at the time of Roe versus Wade, there was historical precedent for abortion being legal. And Casey looked at that, and they said at the time of Roe versus Wade that they said they had a rather dubious argument that there was already historical precedent. And he looks at their argument, he pulls them apart, he says it isn't. It relies on a couple of articles that are now discredited, that don't really represent the views at the time. So that's the historical section. And then he goes all the way back to ancient history, back to medieval times. He says, was there any time in the past when there was a legal right to abortion? And he looks at all these cases and he finds no examples where there's legal right for abortion. So this is an example where if one of the other justices says, but have you heard of XXX way back in the 17th century or way back in the 13th century? And it's very clear that in this particular district, this particular English county or this particular case, that they did have a right for abortion, then that could turn that whole historical section around. So that's how I say it all depends on what they find. But as it was at the point of writing 2 months ago in that historical section, and he looked also at just before the Roe versus Wade, there were 30 states for which it was absolutely illegal to have any form of abortion. And then on the other ones, some of them it was legal, but none of them were as liberal about it as Roe versus Wade. So he says there's no historical precedent at the time of Roe versus Wade, but you don't just go by historical precedent, you also go by, I can't remember the legal term, but your entrenched kind of rights or whatever it is, your entrenched, I can't remember the legal term, I've got it in my article. So he says that there are other things like your right to privacy and your personal philosophy and your way of life, right to live your own way of life and things like that. And those basic rights that you do get from the Constitution, you get from the legal system, then he goes and looks at those and how those apply to Roe versus Wade. And then he also looks at reliance, which is the idea that even if Roe versus Wade was decided improperly, that the American people have come to rely on it. And so on reliance, then he makes this very, so on reliance, it's very possible that the 2 or 3 of the specialist centrist judges, that they may decide on reliance that he's gone too far. That's well possible. And it's also that they decide, we can move the judicial line a little bit further than that, and we're absolutely sure that the general public do rely on the right to abortion. So we have to see what all the legal arguments follow from that. So we don't know that this is going to pass. So think of it like alternative future histories. So there's one future where in July they decide to overturn Roe versus Wade. There's another one in which they reduce it to 15 weeks. There's another one in which they retain it to 21 weeks. We don't really know which of the, we don't know. The justices themselves don't know. And it's important to realise that the justices themselves, they don't decide their cases in advance. That would be very serious professional misconduct. So they don't know. They probably don't know any more than anyone else what their final decision will be at this point. And this particular argument, he put it up like a trial balloon. So when they used to fly hot air balloons and gas balloons before the modern weather forecasts and so on, they would send up a trial balloon to go up the same height as the manned flight to see which direction it's going to fly. You don't want to go flying into a mountain or over the sea or something. So so this is basically like that. It's a trial balloon that he sent up for the other justices to look at, just the first draft, to see how they respond to it. And they may well have found, so we get lots of people in articles finding lots of flaws in this draft. Well, very likely that the other justices found flaws in it too. So we don't know then what comes of those and what how the draft was changed, and then what his changes were and what their changes were. And it's likely gone through many, many drafts by now. Very, very different, likely from that original. So that's important to realise. So we've got these future histories, we don't know which it's in. It's really far too soon to worry about which of those histories we are in, because we don't know which we're going to be in. But you can have contingency plans. So that basically is what there are contingency plans for those different possibilities. So then remember that what the justices decided is, if in this draft decision, not their final decision, we don't know, is that that this goes over to people. It's for the people to decide. So there is a narrow legislative path that can lead to from the midterms leading to the legislature actually deciding that yes, Roe versus Wade, yes, the American public do rely on this, and we're going to legislate for Roe versus Wade. There's a narrow path to that. And so the situation at the moment is that there are 50 senators indeed who are in favour of a 15-week period for abortion. That's if you include the two Republicans along with the Democrats. There's one Democrat senator, Joe Manchin, who always votes pro-choice. So he caucuses with the pro-choice people. So there's no way that he is going to vote for them. Now, if it were in the as we have in the United Kingdom, the simple majority passes something like this, then that would be it. You've got the majority along with Kamala Harris for the casting vote. But no, it doesn't work like that in the United States. There's the filibuster rule, which is that you have to have 60 votes, except for particular carve-outs. And so there is a carve-out for the nominating of the Supreme Court justices. That can be done with 50 votes. So there's a big question, and Joe Biden, he's been a senator for many years, decades, and he regards the filibuster as very important. He's often been in opposition as a senator, and the opposition often use the filibuster to stop measures that they don't want passed. So he takes a much longer view than some people, and he says, well, you know, if we get rid of the filibuster, then when we are in opposition, we won't be able to stop things that we don't want. And there have been several things in the past where it's been vital to the Democrats that they have the filibuster. So Joe Biden is very reluctant to completely get rid of the filibuster. He is prepared for carve-outs, like the carve-out already for the nomination of the Supreme Court Justice. There's a carve-out for the budgets, for certain budget provisions. There's also, so he's prepared, depending on circumstances, to have a carve-out for voting restrictions. We don't know yet, but if they do pass Roe versus Wade, then he'll have the big decision: is he prepared to do a carve-out for Roe versus Wade, or something vaguely including it, some broader topic including it? The issue of that the other way around is that if he has a carve-out, then when the Republicans are in power, if they manage to get both houses, they could then flip-flop it and say, well, we're going to have an abortion ban throughout the entire country, including the pro-choice states. So there's a downside for a carve-out for abortion, although that would be such an extreme measure that maybe people could say, well, you know, they'll never do that. So so Biden will have to consider this very carefully, and then if he does go for that, then there is a narrow legislative path to legislating for Roe versus Wade, and that is that actually in the midterms they somewhat favour the Democrats compared to most midterms. On the gerrymandering, then 7 of the states that were quite marginal for the Democrats have now been made safe states by the gerrymandering. Only 1 Republican's turned from marginal to safe. So those are states that Biden won in 2020, which the Democrats wouldn't normally win. Not states, sorry, districts. So there are 7 of those which are now they can pretty much bank on them. The Democrats will have them. So that's an advantage for the Democrats, although it doesn't actually shift the seats. Then, in addition to that, the filibustering is actually somewhat reduced, the Republican advantage, the Republican had a 5-seat advantage for the due to gerrymandering, and this has probably been slightly reduced as a result of we have yet to see what some of the results are still to come in, but it's probably been slightly reduced. It's probably less than 5, though it's not probably not as low as 1 or 2, which is what originally the Democrat at one point seemed possible. So now, if the this turns out to be a really hot button issue in the midterms, then it's possible that the Democrats slightly increase the majority for the House. If at least lots of Democrats turning out and wanting to vote, and 6 out of 10 of Americans, approximately, various polls, are in favour of pro-choice. So it's quite possible this could boost the turnout for the Democrats more than it boosts the turnout for the Republicans. Another thing that could boost it for the Democrats is that Trump is nominating many of the candidates, and he's choosing far-right candidates. Now, in far-right states, a far-right candidate may be a good far-right district. A far-right candidate may be a good candidate, but in a moderate district, it's possible that a far-right candidate would actually lose, and it's possible that if they position themselves too closely to Trump, that this will alienate even some Republicans. So we have yet to see what the effect is of Trump nominating far-right Republicans into possibly moderate seats. So there's that issue, and that's also an issue for the Senate. Now, in the Senate, it just so happens in this particular mix of seats that are up for re-election this cycle, then 2 of the seats are in states that voted majority for Biden in 2020. 2 of the Republican senators who are up for re-election are in states that voted majority for Biden in 2020. And none of the seats that are up for re-election for Democrats are in states that voted for majority Trump. So this means that you need a really good showing for the Republicans for them to start winning Senate seats. It's also much less common to lose the Senate than to lose the House, historically. So the Democrats do have a chance of retaining the Senate and even gaining, and maybe even gaining 2 seats. There's also North Carolina, I think it is, which they have a possibility of gaining that one as well, because it's really very marginally pro-Trump. And so there is a possibility that they end up with 50 seats in the Senate and that are pro-choice, and probably as many as 52 seats for the Democrats if they do have a good showing, and if it's a hot button issue, and if it leads to Democrats turning out to vote for senators too. So that would then lead to this situation where it's possible that after the midterms that the Democrats hold the House and they're able to. So this bill, they will have to start again because it's a new legislative cycle. So they can't use this bill. They can use the exact same text if they want, but they can't just carry the bill over. And then, so it's possible that they pass in the House, they pass in the Senate, and then if Biden approves a carve-out of the filibuster, they probably have enough votes too to be able to pass it in the Senate based on this carve-out. So there's a narrow legislative path. And then finally, there is the possibility that Democrats will, the pro-choice states will, they are making it easier and easier for people who are pregnant to travel from the pro-life states to the pro-choice states to get their abortion. So this is another possibility, another thing that they're looking into. So the pro-life states, they can forbid women from travelling to get an abortion, but they can't forbid them from travelling. You can't just say no pregnant women are permitted to travel out of the state. I mean, that would be absurd. And they can't prohibit pregnant women plus their husbands or partners to driving out with them, have someone to drive them out of the state because they want to visit, their sister in the nearby state or whatever. They obviously can't prohibit that. And so but the big problem is for like people who are poor, who are not very easily able, and the biggest distance they have to travel is over 600 miles. They might have to travel across several states to reach a pro-choice state. Then that really is quite economically difficult for poor families. So the pro-choice states, they can assist these people, and so long as none of the assistance actually happens in the originating state, there's not much that the pro-choice state can do about that. As long as they travel to this other state, and then all the assistance is in that other state. And so there's a big question about what can they do about preventing travel. It's probably not that much they can do about preventing assistance for travel, but that's obviously going to be a big legal issues and so on in that. So there is quite a lot that the pro-choice states can do about this, and we have to see what the details are. But if we do end up in that landscape where there's a patchwork of states, then there are things that pro-choice states can do, and you do have free travel everywhere throughout the United States. But there is definitely the possibility, like that happened in Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland, where there was a lady who in 2018 her case led to the reversal of the Republic of Ireland laws, and abortion is now legal in the Republic of Ireland because she was forbidden an abortion at a time when it would have when the fetus wasn't really viable, and it was very late fetus, and this led to her death due to complications. And but she was forbidden because of their very strict anti-abortion laws. So this led to lot of protests, and that eventually she died of that, and that eventually led to the laws in 2018 being changed in Ireland. So that is the saddest possible route, which it could end up with women actually, or people actually dying in the pro-life states, and then that could possibly to change the laws for that reason too. Because bear in mind that these states haven't had such restrictive abortion laws since 1973, and public attitudes have changed a lot, and it's quite possible that actually, even if they enact these laws, that they find that it's actually not viable anymore because the effects are just too bad for them. So that's another possibility, that if the people who are pro-choice say there are going to be very dire effects, the people who are pro-life say there won't be, and it's possible these dire effects happen. If they do, then it's likely to sway some of the people who are pro-life, because they're pro-life because they don't expect these things to happen. So those are some of the main points I want to make on this. The main thing is that we don't know yet if this is going to happen. So we don't know, and then there's the legislative route. There's the possibility of assistance for people in pro-life states, and there's the actual legal boundaries of what is permitted by way of preventing that assistance is not very well sorted out yet. There's probably lots of legal cases about things like whether it's permitted for pro-choice states to provide the funds for travel for poor people in pro-life states, and then there'll be issues about things like that. And certainly once they are in the pro-life state, then pro-choice state, then there's no jurisdiction by the pro-life state that could prevent them having an abortion. And then there's the possibility of these sad cases which can shift things like happened in Ireland. That is that's this. Hopefully this helps make the whole thing a bit clearer, and hopefully you're a bit less scared, and helps understand. And then this thing that I sometimes share with people who are scared, it's a thing from the Dalai Lama, that from his own experiences, that he had to flee Tibet when his own monks were being killed by the by Chinese just for keeping their vows, and being forced to break their vows. And he went. So in that case, it was his monks were being killed or forced to have sexual intercourse by the Chinese, who were opposed to the Buddhists in Tibet, and he was forced to flee Tibet with his life at risk. He went through very bad times, and he says that if there's much when there's if there's if you can deal with if there's things you can do, then it's great, and then if there's everything you do, then too much effort, and then if there's nothing to do, there's no use in much worry. And that's his philosophy, based on centuries, like medieval times, maybe a bit later. Shantideva, an ancient. This is a advice that goes back to an ancient Tibetan mystic meditator from I can't remember, probably 17th century or something, I don't know, way back, called Shantideva, and he, that was one of his advice that has survived to the present day, and basic Buddhist advice. But the way he put it was something like that. That was the Dalai Lama's paraphrasing of it. So when there is a possibility, then you do something about it. When there isn't much use in much worry, and that this greatly simplifies things. You just demarcate in your life, what you can do. If there's this, I can do something about this. Well, then do it. And there's something I can't do it. Then you just recognise clearly, this is something. There's no much use in much worry. I can't do anything about this. You made some big mistakes, say. Then there's nothing you can do about it. So, or maybe there is something. Then if there is, then you do it. So that's how it works. So it's the same with things like this. So I hope this helps some of you who's scared of all this. I'll put the link to this in my video description, and then you can read the text and all details about it.